Good afternoon, fine people of Native American Studies. Well done on getting this far. It's what have we got? 2 weeks left in the semester, so it always feels like a great sigh of relief when we get this far. So well done to everybody for getting this far. It's not always easy. Um, so my tribal biography project is about the Choctaw Nation. Um, the main reason why I chose the Choctaw is their association with Ireland and the Irish famine. Back in 1847, the Choctaw, after being ran off their lands by the US government, sent a donation of $170 to the Irish who were suffering at the height of the famine in 1947. 1947 in Ireland, or 1847 in Ireland, should I say. 1847 in Ireland was known as Black 47. They were halfway through the 5 year crop failure of the potato, which they become so dependent on. And all around the world was spreading that the Irish were dying in their tens of thousands, emigrating and even more. And the Choctaw Nation, even though they were suffering themselves, about 10, 12 years after finally settling in Oklahoma by the time the Trail of Tears had finished, um, they gathered up $170 and sent it as a donation. That story has always resonated with anybody who has any historical knowledge about Ireland and the US. And obviously, the connections between Ireland and the US are long and somewhat complicated at times. But there's a lot of connections there nonetheless, and this is one of them that a lot of historians would refer to. In the recent pandemic of the coronavirus, when it started in 2020, the Navajo Nation here in the Four Corners area of Utah suffered greatly, and a couple of GoFundMe's were set up. One was set up and specifically that has raised to this date almost $8 million. If you find that GoFundMe page and go through the donations on it and go through the messages on it that people have left when they've left their donations, you will see the amount of Irish people that have donated. Not only the amount of Irish people that have donated, but the amount of Irish people that have donated and said they did so due to what the Choctaw did in 1847. So in many ways, it's that pay it forward aspect that people have become so accustomed to today. If you drive through McDonald's and pay for somebody behind you and so forth. And so the Irish returned that in their spades, maybe not to the Choctaw people, but to another Native American tribe that were suffering and needed help during the pandemic. Um, so that's the reason. That's the main reason why I chose them. Honestly, I've always had an interest in Native American history. Um, I think because I'm of Irish traveller descent, that we have a lot of similarities. We've both been persecuted by our own people, by our own governments. We're both outliers in the community. There is a serious amount of, if you look at the rates of people from the Native American community that are jailed, that are drug addicts, that are alcoholics, far proportionally represent a huge percentage of the prison population and drug clinics and that type of stuff. Irish travellers would be the same. There's also the aspect of poverty, high unemployment. Sorry, excuse me, I've got a cold. Um, Unemployment among Irish travellers runs at over 80%. Education, another big issue as well. So I've always had that affinity towards Native American people, and one of the reasons why I took this Native American Studies class. Um, with the Choctaw, again, I've mentioned in class I've done I've finished my history degree, so I am a history major, and I have my endorsement to teach history. So I have a fairly good knowledge of stuff like the Trail of Tears and all the different acts that were passed and the Dawes Act and the different acts that that led to taking land off the Native American Indians and putting white people on it and possessing the land and taking everything they owned and held dear to them. Um, so I didn't go into it blind. I knew that the Choctaw were the first um, Native American tribe who actually were sent out on the Trail of Tears after they signed two treaties. Obviously, the one treaty about the in 1830 that dispossessed American Indians of their lands, and then the one that the Choctaw signed themselves, the Rabbit Creek treaty that they signed themselves. That set them up to be the first Native American tribe that set forth on the Trail of Tears. They ended up in Oklahoma. They lost thousands along the way. It was an arduous journey. In many ways, it's similar to the pioneer story. The pioneers, Utah pioneers, coming to Utah, struggling through Wyoming, other areas when they were on their way on the Mormon Trail, even on the Oregon Trail. Some of them took the Oregon Trail. Some of them even came from the south. Some of them came from as far flung as New Orleans. My wife's own great grandmother was on the Wiley Handcart Company, and they actually came from north of New Orleans. Um, and so it's as a people, the Choctaw, peace loving people. Their history extends all the way back 1800, 2000 years ago into Southwest America. Um, they originated in northern, what is now northern Mexico now, and found a way across but there was no border then. But if you could imagine the border now, found a way across into Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, that kind of area, and they settled there. And they are the descendants of the mound builders. There's a massive amount of mounds in Mississippi that were built by mound building Native Americans, for want of a better word, I suppose, the ancestors of the Native Americans, really. And then the current Native Americans who settled there, they took on the mystique and the prestige of the mounds, and made them their own. The Choctaw themselves have a mound there that they call the Mother Mound, where they believe that's where their people sprang forth from. They came forth from that mound, from the center of it, and into the earth from there, which is very similar to many other stories. I mean, the Celtic people as well. They believe they came from the tree. That's the Celtic tree of life, and they believe they came from a tree. There's the Japanese as well. They believe they came from the earth and came from the sea. I mean, all across the world. There's so many different what's the word I'm searching for? Adam and Eve stories. That go back to all these old cultures and beliefs, and so many of them are based from the center of the earth, or from something springing forth from the center of the earth, and the Choctaw are no different. Um, they their first encounters with the Europeans set them up for their first real battles, because previous to that, they with any tribes they had issues with, they would settle them with games of a ball game they had that was similar to lacrosse. But the arrival of the Spanish, De Soto, others like them, they changed all that for the Choctaw. They changed all that for a lot of the Native Americans. They brought with them death and destruction, and so the Choctaw were left with no choice but to reply with death and destruction, and they did when they had to. Um, Wiping out almost all of De Soto's men, and sending him back to Spain. Not long, but I mean, De Soto himself and his men had killed thousands of Choctaw before that. In one instance, they'd killed over 1,500 Choctaw uh, Native Americans, and so they only got back what they gave out themselves. Um, from that, then they continue to live in the area, and more settlers come. Um, the War of Independence happens, and the Choctaw find themselves then in a unlikely position of, what do they do? Where do they go? They signed treaty after treaty with the American government between the mid 1700s and mid 1800s. They'd signed over 9 treaties with the American government, trying to hold on to the land, ceding land to the American government. But it was never enough. The American government always wanted more, as we know. Greed got the better of them, and so they found themselves on the Trail of Tears, sent to Oklahoma from their Native American lands in Mississippi. Now there was a few thousand that stayed behind, but they were persecuted if they did stay behind. And a lot of them were ran off the land by settlers that came in and broke the treaties, which again was no surprise. They were sent on their way to Oklahoma over 3 years, from 1830 to 1832, even into 1833. Thousands died on the way. They were robbed, they were beaten, they were murdered on the way. A lot of them walked, didn't have transport. The elderly, the infirm, the young. It was cold, it was wet. Again, imagine the Mormon Trail, what you know of it, and the pioneers that came and how they suffered, and the Native Americans suffered just as much, if not even more. Eventually, then they settle there. They build up their culture again. They don't give up. They're resilient. They stay strong. They keep their core values. They're a matriarchal society, so women, their ancestry lines are descended through their women, and they built themselves back up, made their own constitution, based it off the United States Constitution, similar to what the French did after when the French stormed the Bastille. When the French wrote their new constitution, they based it off the United States Constitution, as well as they did in Haiti, as they did in Bolivia, as they did in a lot of South American countries where they rose up against the Spanish. And so the Choctaw did that as well. They based it off. They had three branches. They had judicial, executive, and they tried to form their own nation. Eventually, after years and years, I mean, in 1907, when Oklahoma wanted to become a state, the Indian Bureau of Affairs was sent in again. The government again reneged on treaties. But through legal channels, through resilience, through never giving up, the Choctaw established a nation, and it's a nation that's still established to this day in Oklahoma. And they've built it up. It's now a modern day society. They have casinos, they have travel plazas, you name it, they've built it. Just last year, they built a casino and shopping plaza at the cost of over $500 million. Um, so they've literally came from being dispossessed of everything they had to rebuilding themselves, rebranding themselves, but never losing who they were, never losing the core values of who they were, where they came from, how they got to where they are. And so it's a story of rags to riches. It's a story of persecuted, and they were persecuted. The persecuted overcoming every persecution that was thrown at them and put upon them by white settlers, by the U.S. government, by successive multiple U.S. governments, by the U.S. Army, who ran them off their land. There was bounty hunters who hunted them. I mean, the stories that abound about them, if you read journals and all the old journals, stuff like that are out there. I mean, it's crazy to think what went on. But here they are today in 2022, stronger than maybe they ever been, economically anyway. Unemployment rates, as I said earlier on, some Native American tribes there, one of them had unemployment rates of up to 80%. They've dropped that down into the 20s. They're employing their own people. They're giving people healthcare, free healthcare, education, and they're becoming the nation that they deserve to be. And thankfully, they've regained some land in Mississippi as well. There's a reservation in Mississippi, not a nation. The nation's in Oklahoma. That's the distinction between both. And the reservation is in Mississippi, and some of the descendants of the original Choctaw tribe that lived in Mississippi still live there today. So yeah, it was an interesting project. As I said, I knew a bit going into it. I didn't know a whole lot, but I knew a bit. I certainly know a whole lot more now than I did before. And my affinity for not just the Choctaw, but for the Native Americans in general, has only grown in stature. And it's you have to be the cheerleader. You really do, to see what they came from, and how they got to and how they kept going. The fact that they never give up is absolutely amazing. So, yeah, that's basically why I took on the project. The bit of information that's in it, and my I suppose my love, my gra, my Tommy kind of Squelga, or speaking of Squelga, my gra, my love for the Native Americans and for the Choctaw tribe has come from. And one can only hope and pray that in future generations that that poverty trap that so many Native American tribes were forced into, still kind of forced into to a degree, that they all come out of it, not just the Choctaw, not just other tribes like them, but that they all do because they all deserve it, because they all have suffered and suffered at the hands of whether people like it or not, and I'm not PC anyway, but at the hands of the white man, and that's the reality of it. I mean, there's no getting away from it. So hopefully, these guys are all going well. They get what they deserve in the long run. So thanks for listening. Slán agus beannacht, and see you soon. Take care. Bye bye.